Did you know Roman elites believed warm gladiator blood could heal disease, and that a fighter's sweat could be bottled and sold like high-end perfume? The arena wasn't just violence. It was a strange, dirty, highly organized industry, a machine that turned human beings into products and pain into profit. And most history lessons barely scratch the surface. So if you're ready for the real story, brutal, bizarre, and way more intelligent than Hollywood ever admitted, take your seat in the stands. This is Deadliest Empires, history written in steel. And today, we're uncovering 10 realities that prove gladiators weren't simply slaves with swords. They were manufactured, trained, marketed, medically repaired, and mythologized until the empire itself couldn't look away. Let's begin where every legend was forged. Fact number 1. Gladiators were built in a factory of pain. Forget the image of a desperate prisoner swinging wildly for survival. A true gladiator was closer to an elite athlete, the product of a system designed for one purpose: performance. That system was the ludus, a training school that felt like a mix of military barracks, sports academy, and high-security prison. One of the most famous, the Ludus Magnus, even had a direct underground connection to the Colosseum, like a private hallway from preparation to spectacle. Inside, new recruits, often stripped of identity, were shaped by a trainer and owner called a lanista. They didn't begin with steel, they began with repetition.
Thousands upon thousands of strikes against a wooden post, drilling technique until it became instinct. The arena wasn't chaos, it was choreography backed by discipline, because a sloppy fighter didn't create a legend, he created a corpse. Fact number 2. They trained with overweight weapons on purpose. Gladiators weren't trained to merely survive, they were trained to look unstoppable. Many practiced using a wooden sword called a rudis and heavy shields designed to be far heavier than real combat gear. The idea was simple: train under exaggerated difficulty so that the real thing felt light. When fight day came, under the Mediterranean heat, with sand in the eyes and a crowd screaming, those real weapons felt almost effortless. Their timing got sharper, their movements faster, their endurance more dangerous. Meanwhile, an opponent who wasn't conditioned the same way would burn out quickly, dragging heavy armor, struggling for breath, reacting slower with each exchange. In other words, their training was not about getting tough, it was about becoming efficient, so efficient it looked like something beyond human. Fact number 3. Silence was a weapon in the training yard. Here's a detail most people never imagine. In some elite schools, gladiators were trained under strict rules of silence, not as punishment, but as psychology.
When you remove speech, a fighter is forced to read everything else: foot pressure, shoulder angle, breathing tempo, the tiny shift of weight that signals an attack before it happens. Over time, this creates something terrifying: hyper-awareness. And that mattered because the arena wasn't quiet. It was a storm of sound, tens of thousands of voices chanting for blood. A normal person would freeze, panic, lose focus, but a trained gladiator? He could block out the world and enter a state of combative trance, reacting before the crowd even understood what they were seeing. That ability didn't just create winners, it created legends. Fact number 4. The arena was game design, not a random brawl. Gladiator fights weren't simply strong versus strong. They were designed like a deadly chess match. Rome divided fighters into strict classes, each with specific weapons, armor, and weaknesses. And the best matchups were asymmetrical: skill versus power, speed versus defense, patience versus aggression. The most famous pairing? Retiarius versus Secutor. The Retiarius fought light, sometimes almost unarmored, armed with a net and trident. His goal was distance, disruption, and control. The Secutor was the opposite, a walking tank with a large shield and a smooth helmet designed to prevent the net from catching. The crowd didn't just watch a fight. They watched a story unfold. The heavy hunter trying to corner the fast prey, before exhaustion and mistakes turned the hunter into the hunted.
It wasn't brute force that won. It was the fighter who played the system better. Fact number 5. Most gladiators didn't switch styles. In movies, a gladiator can pick up any weapon and instantly become deadly. Real life didn't work that way. A gladiator's entire body was molded around his role, his balance, his footwork, even the way he breathed under armor. A shield-heavy fighter developed different muscles than a fast-moving net fighter. Switching categories wasn't just changing tools. It was like relearning how to exist in combat. That's why specialization was extreme. Most fighters stayed in one class for years, turning their bodies into perfectly tuned instruments for one style of killing, or surviving. And when a light class fighter beat a heavily armored opponent, his value didn't just rise, it exploded. Because he didn't only defeat a man, he defeated the empire's carefully built odds. Fact number 6. Many gladiators were volunteers. Yes, many gladiators were enslaved, but not all of them. As the empire grew, the arena became something else, a shortcut to wealth and fame, especially for men who had nothing left to lose. Bankrupt citizens, disgraced soldiers, debtors drowning in shame. Some signed a contract, often described as a surrender of rights, in exchange for training, food, housing, and the possibility of fortune. These volunteers were called auctorati. And the bargain was brutal. You agree to be burned, chained, and possibly killed by iron, to escape being invisible.
Because in Rome, anonymity could be its own form of death. But in the arena, if you survived, your name could shake the city. Fact number 7. Gladiators were ancient superstars. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were brands. Fans carved graffiti into walls praising them like celebrities, boasting their victories, their charm, even describing them as heartthrobs. Think of it like ancient social media, etched in stone. And obsession created an economy that feels almost unreal today. People collected their sweat, scraped from skin and mixed with the oils used in training, then sold it as luxury cosmetics. Elite women paid fortunes for it, believing it carried a warrior's vitality and raw magnetism. There were even beliefs around blood. Some Romans thought drinking blood from a fallen gladiator could cure illnesses, especially epilepsy. To modern ears, it sounds insane. To Rome, it was logical. Because gladiators weren't seen as normal men, they were vessels of power, living proof of courage. Fact number 8. Gladiators had better medical care than most Romans. Here's the twist. Because gladiators were expensive, their owners treated them like investments. A wounded fighter wasn't tossed aside, he was repaired. Gladiator schools had doctors skilled in trauma, bleeding control, and recovery methods that ordinary citizens could only dream of. They cleaned wounds with wine and vinegar, used early techniques to prevent infection, and managed healing with baths, massage, and careful monitoring.
Some of the most famous medical minds of antiquity gained experience in gladiator environments, learning anatomy and injury care from the constant reality of combat wounds. And there was another secret: recovery tonics made from plant ashes, rich in minerals, helping strengthen bones and speed recovery. These men weren't only trained to fight, they were medically supported to keep fighting. Fact number 9. Gladiators ate for survival, not aesthetics. Forget the modern image of shredded fighters living on meat and protein.
many gladiators were known as barley eaters. Their diet leaned heavily on barley, legumes, and beans, carb-heavy foods that built stamina and, surprisingly, body fat. And that fat had a tactical purpose. A layer of subcutaneous fat could protect organs and major blood vessels from shallow cuts. A gladiator could bleed dramatically, enough to thrill the crowd, while suffering less lethal damage than a lean body would. It was survival engineering. They weren't built to look pretty. They were built to absorb punishment and keep moving. Fact number 10. Hollywood's thumbs down is a myth. Now for the most famous lie of all, the iconic thumbs down death sentence, the way it's shown in movies, almost certainly not how it worked. Ancient sources suggest the gesture was more complex. The Latin phrase often referenced, pollice verso, means turned thumb, but it doesn't specify direction.
Many historians argue the signal for death may have been a thumb extended upward or pointed like a blade toward the throat, symbolizing the finishing strike. Meanwhile, mercy may have been shown with a hidden thumb tucked into a fist, like a sword being sheathed. In other words, the gesture we see today as approval could have meant execution in the Roman arena. 1,000 years of history got rewritten because it looked better on screen, and the world believed it. If you made it this far, you now understand the arena wasn't just blood sport. It was industry, psychology, fame, medicine, and myth, all wrapped into one brutal stage that kept an empire hypnotized. So tell me in the comments, which fact shocked you the most? And would you survive one day inside the ludus? If you want more dark history that feels like it shouldn't be real, hit like, subscribe, and step into the ranks of legends. And when you're ready for the next journey, we're uncovering the top 10 creatures ancient soldiers swore were real. Your seat in the arena is waiting.